She danced beside the sea, but before the music, there was mourning. Before the song, there was silence. And before she ever lifted her voice, Miriam watched a nation bleed. Welcome to Mindful Musing, a journey with God, where faith comes alive, and every story reminds us that the God of yesterday is still the God of today. Here, we dive deep into the untold wonders of Scripture, immersive, emotional, powerful. Stories that stir your spirit, ignite your faith, and draw you closer to the heart of God. Subscribe now and join the journey, as we step into one of the most astonishing moments in all of biblical history. Long before her name echoed with tambourines, Miriam was a girl hiding behind reeds. A watcher. A whisperer of freedom in a land that broke backs and swallowed dreams. She was there when a baby in a basket drifted from her mother's arms into the crocodile-infested Nile, and somehow into destiny. She was there when blood turned the river red, when frogs and fire cracked the Egyptian sky. And she was there when the sea, finally, parted like a wound, and healed like a miracle. But who was she? This prophetess whose voice led a nation's first worship. This is not just Miriam's story. It is the story of every woman who has stood guard over dreams others dared to kill. The story of a sister who became a seer. A leader made from lullabies, war songs, and wilderness fire. The Nile was not quiet. It hissed secrets through the reeds and whispered warnings in the wind. It had swallowed too many sons. And now, it carried one more, an infant wrapped in linen, floating in a papyrus basket no bigger than a womb. His name was not spoken yet, but his sister already knew it would echo. Miriam crouched behind the tall grass, eyes wide and unblinking, heart thundering in her chest. She dared not move. The Egyptian guards had long grown cruel, and midwives were under Pharaoh's orders to drown every Hebrew boy. To breathe too loud was to invite death. But Miriam, barely old enough to carry water without spilling, stood guard. Her little brother had been hidden for 3 months. Now he was too loud, too large, too alive to conceal. Her mother had woven the basket with shaking fingers. Her father had prayed in silence. Miriam had watched, remembered. And now, she watched still. Sunlight shimmered on the water, turning the Nile into molten gold. But it was not precious. It was dangerous. The river had become a graveyard of dreams, a place where deliverers sank before they could speak. Then came the sound of footsteps. Sandals crunching against gravel. Laughter, light, feminine, royal. Pharaoh's daughter. Miriam's throat tightened. Not now, Lord. Not her. The princess approached the riverbank with her maidens. Her kohl-lined eyes scanned the waters lazily, until they widened. The basket. The baby. She knelt. Opened it. The child cried. Miriam's heart stopped. But something shifted in the air, soft, unseen. The princess did not call for soldiers. She reached out, fingers trembling, and pulled the baby into her arms. She whispered something in Egyptian. A cradle song. A vow. And that was the moment Miriam stepped out. She should have been afraid, an enslaved Hebrew girl walking up to royalty. But her feet moved before her mind could question. "Shall I fetch a Hebrew nurse for the child?" she asked, voice steady. The princess turned. Surprise flickered across her face, but no rage followed. Only curiosity. "Yes," she said, holding the baby closer. "Do that." Miriam ran, no, flew, across the dirt paths back to her mother. Her feet knew the way. Her spirit burned. The God of her ancestors had cracked the silence. Not with thunder, but with a baby's cry and a sister's courage. That night, as the stars shimmered above Egypt, Miriam lay on the roof of her family's home, listening to the river. It was still not quiet. But now, it hummed with promise. Her brother was safe, alive, hidden in Pharaoh's house. The very empire that tried to kill him would now raise him. And Miriam? She would keep watching. The river had not forgotten her. She would be its voice one day. She didn't know it yet, but the girl in the reeds had just become a prophet in waiting. The whip cracked like thunder through Goshen's air. Dust rose in clouds. Backs bent under brick and straw. And the cries of birthing women were muffled behind stone walls, where no lullabies could be sung without fear. Miriam had grown into womanhood beneath an empire's boot. Her body was stronger now, honed by carrying pails, kneading dough, and gathering whispers. But her eyes still held the fire from the reeds. She had not forgotten the Nile or the way Pharaoh's daughter's hands had trembled holding her brother. Moses was gone now, vanished into the wilderness after slaying a taskmaster. Rumors swirled like desert wind. Some said he was mad. Others said he was dead. Miriam knew better. God wasn't finished with him. Or with her. She moved through the slave quarters like smoke, watching, listening, remembering. The women looked to her now, not just as a midwife, but as something older than years, a bearer of memory. She helped bring their babies into a world where every son risked death at birth. And each time she caught a child, washed the blood from the mother's thigh, whispered his name into the shadows, she added another mark to her soul. "Deliver us," they would weep, clutching the living and mourning the dead. "Where is the God of our fathers?" Miriam had no answer. Only tears. But she remembered her mother's hands, calloused, graceful, carving psalms into silence. She remembered secret songs, hummed low during grinding work, tunes shaped like prophecy, lyrics braided from loss and hope. They sang of a deliverer. One who would shatter the yoke. One who would split the sky and drown the oppressor in the sea. Some scoffed. Others wept. But Miriam sang too, until her voice became oil and fire and blade. Then, late one night, word came like a tremor, he's returned. Moses stood in the courtyard of their home, face weathered like stone, a staff in hand and a strange light burning behind his eyes. He did not smile. He did not weep. He simply spoke. "God has sent me." And in the silence that followed, Miriam knew the time had come. The war wouldn't start with chariots and swords. It began with a shepherd holding a stick and a sister who remembered the river. Plagues followed, blood, frogs, hail, and darkness. Egypt reeled. Miriam stood on the edges of each miracle, singing to the women in the shadows, helping them see what Pharaoh could not. This was not chaos. This was birth. Israel was crowning. Groaning. Deliverance was not gentle. And as blood smeared doorposts and death stalked the firstborn, Miriam held the trembling hands of mothers and whispered what she now believed with every breath. "This pain will pass. But when we leave with songs." She didn't yet know the sea would split for them. But she knew what it meant to labor beside the impossible. And Miriam, prophetess, midwife, sister, was ready to lead when the waters broke. It began with smoke on the horizon. Not fire. Not battle. Just a haze, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Miriam was preparing lentils when the word arrived. A shepherd, they said, had walked into the square, dust-covered, foreign, silent. Until he wasn't. Until he spoke with the voice of thunder and desert winds, saying things no slave dared dream, "Let my people go." She dropped the pot. It could not be him. Not after all these years. Not after the blood and betrayal and the long silence of heaven. Yet before her stood Moses, bearded, hardened, and carrying a staff that shimmered with the weight of God's name. He didn't embrace her. His eyes were flame. His voice carried wilderness. "The God of Abraham has spoken," he said. "He has remembered." Miriam's knees nearly buckled. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't just her brother returning. This was prophecy wearing his face. That night, the people gathered in secret. The old men wept. The young men scoffed. Pharaoh was a god, they said. Egypt was unbreakable. But Miriam, she looked at the stars and saw them shifting. Something ancient had stirred. Then came the signs. It started subtly. A staff turning into a serpent. Leprosy blooming, then vanishing, from Moses's hand. But then the Nile, her Nile, ran red like blood spilled from generations. Fish floated belly up. The stench of judgment suffocated Egypt. Still Pharaoh laughed. Miriam did not. She began whispering to the women as they kneaded their dough, as they drew water from cracked vessels. She taught them the names of the 10 plagues before they arrived. She sang over newborns and told them, "Your sons will see Canaan." She gathered tambourines in secret. Not for mourning, for war songs. Because she had seen it, this was labor, and the nation was crowning. Frogs stormed their ovens. Gnats crawled like curses. Livestock fell dead. Darkness swallowed noon. And Pharaoh's pride began to crack like dry earth. Then came the blood, the lamb's blood. Miriam smeared it across the doorposts with hands that had delivered too many children into chains. Not tonight, she thought. Death will pass over. Not tonight. And in the hush before midnight, she stood beside her mother, both silent, both clinging to what they could not see. Outside, Egypt's gods crumbled. Inside, the Hebrews waited. The air snapped with unseen thunder. Then came the wail. A sound that tore through palaces and peasant huts alike. Firstborns fell. Judgment came swift and final. But not for them. By dawn, Egypt was broken. Moses called to move. And as the camp stirred, as sandals slapped against dust and bread rose without yeast, Miriam tied her scarf tight and lifted her eyes. He had come back, her brother. But something greater had come with him. The deliverer was no longer a promise. He was here. And she would follow the fire. The night smelled of ash and fear. Torches burned low as the camp stirred in silence, 2 million hearts pounding beneath desert stars. Miriam stood near the front, her hand gripped around a satchel of water and bread, the tambourine slung at her side like a sword not yet drawn. Her eyes searched the shadows behind them. Egypt was coming. They had fled in a rush, cradling unleavened hope and bruised memories. But by morning, the sound of wheels had reached the winds, the hiss of horses, the thunder of Pharaoh's wrath echoing across the sands. "He's changed his mind," they whispered. "The army is behind us. In front, only sea." The Red Sea sprawled wide and merciless, a liquid wall. No boats. No bridge. Just water stretching toward the horizon, shimmering with indifference. Behind them, death thundered like chariot wheels. Before them, death waited in salt and waves. And still Moses stood firm. Miriam watched her brother, his silhouette carved against the sea, staff in hand, face lifted to heaven. He said nothing to her. He didn't need to. They had walked too far for miracles to stop now. The people cried out. Some begged to return. Others cursed the God who brought them here. But Miriam stood tall. Her bones remembered every plague. Her hands remembered the lamb's blood. She looked to the women near her, the mothers, the widows, the daughters, and whispered, "Don't look back. Not now. He brought us this far to finish the song." Then came the wind. It roared with ancient voice and violent mercy, splitting the air as Moses raised his staff. The ground trembled. The sea convulsed. And the impossible happened. The water tore in two. Like curtains drawn by invisible hands, waves rose into walls. A path carved itself into the seabed, wet but walkable, like bones rising from the deep. Fish glimmered in the walls beside them, eyes wide. Silence fell. Even Egypt's chariots halted. Moses stepped forward. Then another. And another. Miriam didn't wait for a command. She grabbed the hands of two women beside her and stepped onto the seabed. It felt like walking inside a heartbeat, like stepping between heaven's inhale and earth's exhale. They were no longer fleeing. They were crossing through death into something untouched by empires. As dawn bruised the sky pink, the last Israelite stepped onto the far shore. And Pharaoh's army charged into the path after them. Miriam turned just in time to see Moses lower his staff. The walls collapsed. Horse and soldier alike vanished beneath crashing water. Screams choked. Silence fell. The sea remembered every whip, every stillborn child, every drowned Hebrew boy. Now, it sang judgment. The Israelites stood, soaked in awe. And Miriam, the girl from the reeds, now prophetess of the deep, lifted her tambourine. With a voice forged in slavery and sharpened by deliverance, she sang. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and rider he has thrown into the sea. And the women danced in freedom's spray. The wind had died, but the sea still roared in their memory. Miriam stood ankle-deep in freedom. The morning sun unfurled like a banner over the shoreline, casting golden light across faces still wet with awe. Behind them, the Red Sea sloshed shut over Egypt's finest, chariots shattered, horses still, Pharaoh's pride drowned beneath the waves. Before them stretched wilderness, unknown, untamed. But they were no longer slaves. They were survivors. And someone had to declare it. Sand clung to Miriam's feet as she stepped forward, the tambourine warm in her palm, the same hand that had once clenched a baby's basket, gripped a mother's shaking fingers, and scribed lullabies into chains. Now it was raised, not in defense, but exaltation. She didn't ask for silence. She didn't need permission. She struck the tambourine once, sharp, metallic, like a trumpet splitting the sky. The sound danced across the crowd like fire through wheat. Then her voice rose. Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and rider he has hurled into the sea. The words weren't written. They were born. Each syllable poured from generations of grief, forged in the furnace of Pharaoh's furnace and cooled in the waves of deliverance. Her voice broke through the numbness that clung to them like dust. And the women moved. They came with scarves, with babies tied to their backs, with cracked heels and bleeding soles. They came with tears still drying on their cheeks. But they came. They circled Miriam in rhythm, tambourines echoing, bodies swaying, and robes whipping in the salt wind. The dance was not polished. It was raw, like birth pangs turned to laughter. Like shackles snapping with every stomp. Behind them, men stared, astonished. Even Moses paused, watching his sister transfigure mourning into melody. She sang what he had only spoken. Freedom didn't feel real until it found a tune. Miriam sang of the sea's fury and heaven's power. She named the bodies not by corpse but by conquest, rider and horse, stripped of glory, dragged beneath judgment. She named Yahweh the warrior. Not silent. Not passive. Not distant. A God who fights. A God who sees. Her hair unbound itself as she turned. Her eyes were fire. Her body, a whirlwind of prophecy and praise. And when her feet struck the earth, it was not with fear but with dominion. This is what it looks like when a woman leads worship after war. As the men began to chant behind them, echoing the song of Moses, the people were no longer just fleeing something. They were stepping into something. They were becoming. And Miriam, the girl of reeds and rivers, became the first worship leader of a free nation. She had no title. She had no rank. But the sound of her song would echo down through centuries, a reminder to every silenced woman and watching brother. Prophets don't always hold staffs. Sometimes, they carry tambourines. The desert was not silent, it whispered doubts with every gust, every grain of sand scouring the skin. It was not just the sun that burned in the wilderness, but expectation. Miriam walked beneath open skies, her skin bronzed, her voice still echoing from the Red Sea. But freedom had a cruel edge. Water was scarce. Tempers sharper still. And the people who once danced behind her now murmured with cracked lips and bitter hearts. Deliverance was not the end, it was just the beginning of obedience. She saw it in their eyes, exhaustion. Resentment. The way they looked at Moses with reverence, and at her with something less. Leadership for a woman in a wilderness was like water drawn from a stone, it came only with striking. The moment came without warning. Miriam stood beside Aaron, the priest, her brother of blood and covenant, while Moses, silent, moody, cloaked in mystery, descended from yet another divine encounter. He spoke of visions, of laws etched in fire. But rarely consulted the sister who watched him float in the Nile, who sang victory into their bones. Miriam's voice, so long used to sing freedom, now tightened with frustration. "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" she asked. "Has he not spoken through us also?" It wasn't rebellion. It was a cry, "Don't erase me." But heaven heard. A storm of cloud fell upon the camp. The ground hushed. God spoke, not gently, not vaguely, but with force. "Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" And when the cloud lifted, Miriam fell. Her skin turned white, ghastly, raw, devoured by leprosy. The women gasped. She was pulled from the camp, covered, cursed, isolated. The prophetess who once led dances now wept outside the tents, alone. Moses, blessed, chosen, brother, cried out for her healing. And God listened, but with condition, 7 days of separation. A full week. Time enough for reflection. For reckoning. For the camp to witness that no leader, not even a prophetess, was above the fire of holiness. But something profound happened then. Israel waited. The entire nation halted their march. The cloud did not move. The pillar of fire did not lead forward. Because Miriam, wounded, quarantined, cracked, was not disposable. She mattered. So the women brought her food wrapped in leaves. Children sang the song she taught them by the sea, their voices soft but steady. And each evening, the horizon bled with orange and gold while Miriam knelt in the dust and remembered the tambourine she'd once held high. Not every prophet bleeds in battle. Some bleed in the aftermath. And when the 7th day came, she returned, not diminished, but tempered. Not silenced, but refined. Because even prophets must be reminded, their worth is not in being perfect, but in being willing. And Miriam, flawed, fierce, forgiven, stepped back into the camp not as a goddess, but as a woman whose voice, even broken, could still stir mountains. The wilderness had wounded her. But it had not won. The wilderness didn't mourn with flowers, it mourned with silence. When Miriam died, the sky did not crack open. No thunder rolled. No wind howled. Just stillness, dry and bone deep. One moment she was there, flame in her eyes, a desert matriarch with dust on her feet and prophecy on her tongue, and the next, she was gone. The scriptures recorded in a single line, and Miriam died there and was buried in Kadesh. No lament. No vision. No final prophecy. But the earth felt it. So did the people. Because the water dried up the day she died. The same people who had once danced behind her now found their canteens empty. The wellspring that had followed them, steady, mysterious, faithful, ceased. It wasn't a coincidence. Her life had been water. Every drop of it. From the Nile she watched as a girl, to the Red Sea she sang beside, to the miraculous streams that kept them alive in the wasteland. And now, nothing. Moses said nothing. He stared across the sun-blistered horizon and saw the ghosts of his siblings. First her. Then Aaron would follow. Then even he would not step into the promised land. But Miriam, she had already entered hers. The camp quieted. Dust clung to the tents. And somewhere in the silence, women began to hum the song she taught them. Not the whole thing. Just fragments. Sing to the Lord, horse and rider, into the sea. Voices cracked. Eyes brimmed. The tambourines hadn't been touched in weeks. But now they emerged, wrapped in old cloth, tucked into bags, buried like treasure. One by one, women walked to the edge of the camp, lifted their instruments, and played. There were no wild dances this time. No frenzy. Just movement, slow, swaying like willows in a hot wind. A sacred grief. Because when prophets die, you don't just bury a person. You bury a sound. But sounds can rise again. And in the hush, Miriam's legacy stirred. She had no tomb with pillars. No statue. No scroll filled with her words. But she had daughters of deliverance and women of water who remembered her rhythm. And as long as they sang, her name would echo beyond the desert. At the edge of the land, before inheritance was taken and wars were fought, they remembered the woman who led worship before any sword was drawn. Miriam did not cross into Canaan. But she had already crossed death itself, through the Nile, through the sea, through judgment and exile. She had sung the people forward. Held space for their doubt. Carried their stories in her bones. And when the desert swallowed her body, it did not swallow her voice. Because the river remembers. And the tambourine, once lifted by a prophetess at the waters, still hums with the song of a free people. Years passed. The land bloomed with harvest and battle cries. Israel, once a people of dust and manna, now raised cities and kings. The wilderness was a memory, distant, dry, sacred. But Miriam's echo had not faded. In Shiloh, near the tabernacle, a group of young women gathered by a stream. They weren't prophets. Not yet. Just daughters of the promise, shepherd girls, weavers, water drawers. But they carried stories in their blood. And they had heard the songs. One girl, Tirzah, lifted a tambourine, worn, copper-rimmed, inherited. The others leaned closer. They knew what was coming. She danced at the sea, Tirzah whispered, and her feet struck the sand like war drums. Not a soldier. Not a priest. Just a woman who remembered. The breeze picked up as if leaning in. She watched her baby brother float into a palace. Watched a nation groan in labor. And when the sea cracked open like a womb, she didn't walk, she led. The girls clapped once. Then again. A rhythm was rising. Not from parchment or priest, but from their marrow. She didn't carry a scroll, Tirzah said, voice steady now. She carried a melody that defied pharaohs. The tambourine snapped through the air. The sound was older than they were. Older than kings. It shook the reeds. The river listened. She fell once, Tirzah whispered, softer now. Leprosy. 7 days of silence. But the people waited. They always remembered that part. Because when a prophetess stumbles, she said, you don't move forward until she rises. The other girls nodded, eyes burning. They lived in a time of warriors, of men with swords and dreams of thrones. But this was different. Miriam was not crowned, yet she ruled every song they knew. They danced, slow and solemn. No wild twirls. Just the steady beat of memory on skin. In every circle of footsteps, they rewrote the lie that only men move mountains. Because Miriam moved the water. From Nile to Red Sea to desert spring. Wherever water flowed, her name curled in its current. And in that place, by the river that braided through Shiloh, the next generation remembered not with stone markers or trumpets, but with rhythm. Because some legacies don't end with tombs. They travel in songs sung while grinding grain. In lullabies over cradle-born prophets. In the cadence of feet stomping dust in the name of freedom. The stream beside them gurgled like a whisper. Some said rivers forget. But not this one. This river still sang. And so did they. Miriam's story began in silence, watching, waiting, whispering beneath empire's shadow. But it ended with echoes. Not in a grand parade or coronation, but in quiet rhythms, passed from drum to hand, from firelight to womb. She was not just a prophetess. She was a keeper of memory. She guarded her brother, guarded her people's hope, and even in her fall, she became a mirror, reflecting our desire to be seen, heard, and remembered in the arc of divine history. And that is why Miriam matters. Because for every woman who has ever been overlooked in the shadow of a brother's calling, there is Miriam. For every voice silenced after the song ended, there is Miriam. For every moment we wonder if our rhythm matters in the larger story, there is Miriam. Maybe you weren't called to part seas. Maybe your name won't be etched in scrolls or sung in temple courts. But you carry rhythm. You carry fire. Like Miriam, you carry memory, and when you lift your voice, the river listens.